Hi everybody, welcome to part 2 of the cell growth and cell development videos, mitosis and meiosis. This one's going to be about cancer. A couple of things. One, this is going to be quite a bit shorter than the last one. The last one went long, but this one's going to be quite a bit short, so I'm going to make up for that. We're just going to talk about cancer and how cancer is based on this process of cell development and growth and how it gets out of control. Two standards. We covered this one on the last one. I'm going to add this standard to explain the significance of genetic factors, environmental factors, and pathogenic agents to health from the perspective of both individual and public health. And right now we're going to focus on the individual because we're going to look at the genetic and environmental factors and to some degree the pathogenic factors that can cause cancer. Cancer is a genetic problem. It is caused by a malfunction of a genetic control process that controls the growth and development of cells. Okay, it can be inherited. It can be mostly caused by environmental factors, is what the most, and there's even some diseases, viruses that can cause cancer. So this is a very significant standard to be looking at here. So let's talk about cell cycle in cancer. This is a normal, let's say this is your skin. You got several layers of skin with a basement membrane that separates your skin from all the little stuff underneath it. I don't know if you've ever cut yourself and looked close, but your skin is, not really thick, but it's several cells thick, okay? And the idea is that you've got these layers of cells. This top layer is constantly being what we call slough. That's S-L-O-U-G-H. It's sloughed off, okay? Every time you scratch, or sometimes it just falls off. Usually that's what causes itching. When you're itching, a lot of times this stuff is just flaking off. So it's gone. It needs to be replaced. And through the cell cycle that we just talked about in video 1, this cell and all these cells, they start to grow and divide and pop, create 2 new cells. And one stays here, and one becomes this upper layer, and then it gets sloughed off, and the process happens again and again and again. I mean, you replace this top layer of skin like every 36 hours or something. It's insane. And in fact, a good portion of the dust in your home is these cells that have fallen off of you and are floating around you and your parents and your dog and whatever you have, right? But this area here and over here, of course, is normal skin cells. This is how it looks normally. But sometimes this process can go haywire. And we're just going to pretend like this whole thing looked like that instead of this big blue mass in the middle. And one day, one of these cells that is supposed to grow and divide and stop, and that's the important thing, grow and divide, and once it replaces this, it goes back into the G0 phase and stops growing. These are all supposed to be in the G0 phase, okay? And there's a process. There are several checkpoints in the cell cycle that tell this when to start and when to stop growing. Well, those checkpoints are based on genes. And if those genes get damaged, well, we got a problem. There's several times where it says start and stop. Now, if the gene that says start goes bad, that's no big deal, because that just means this thing is never going to start growing and then eventually dies and gets replaced, and that's that. But what happens if the gene that tells it to stop growing gets damaged? It goes through the entire cell cycle and sometimes says, okay, stop. Stay in G0 phase until we're ready to start again. Well, what happens if that signal never happens? It continually goes through the cell cycle over and over again. One cell becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, 16, 32, and you get this mass that starts to fill up and starts to grow. And it's doing a couple of things. It is pulling tons of energy away from the healthy cells because it's growing like crazy. And another thing it's doing is it's starting to impede the function of whatever this is. Now right now it's skin, okay? And a little bitty lump isn't going to do that big of a deal, but a big lump can press against other things underneath. It can actually cause infections, and this is the worst part, especially with skin cells, if it breaks through this basement membrane and one of these cells breaks loose and gets into the bloodstream, it can go somewhere else in the body and spread. This is called metastasis. It can go somewhere else and spread, and now this is like a seed. It lands somewhere else, maybe in your heart or in your brain or in your lung, and it starts to grow like crazy and causes real problems. So cancer has a genetic basis to it, and we need to learn a little bit about how that works. Now I've already explained all this. So in some cases a mutation can cause it after just sometimes the copying process. Remember how we talked about during the S phase there's a copying problem? or there's a lot of copying done, and sometimes that causes a problem, a mutation, and that mutation can lead to cancer. Cancer can just actually just genetically happen. But a lot of times it's caused by environmental factors, such as sunlight on your skin, foods that you eat, chemicals you're exposed to in the foods that you eat, smoking, that sort of thing. These outside environmental factors can cause a cell to go cancerous, and viruses can do it. In fact, a wart is a cancer, but it grows a different way. It grows up and out instead of down and in, and it normally, well, that's caused by a virus, believe it or not. I believe it's called the human papillomavirus, and it causes cancer. Isn't that crazy? It's the same virus that causes cervical cancer in females. Okay, it leads to an uncontrolled cell growth. It's just growing uncontrollably, and it will grow and grow and grow until, well, there's a couple of things. If it gets in the right place, it can get inside of some kind of a sac. There's this basement membrane wrapped all the way around it somehow, and it grows and it fills that up, and then it stops, and it doesn't burst through that membrane, and as a result, it's fine. I mean, it's called a benign cancer, and you may have a few in your lifetime. I don't know. And I've known people to have fairly large masses that are benign, so the doctor doesn't want to mess with them, and that's that. But when they're not contained in some type of a sac, when they can grow and grow and grow and then break loose and metastasize, that's when it becomes a malignant cancer, and it's a pretty bad thing. All right. Now this is where it gets a little complicated. There's actually has to be 3 mutations to occur in the cell before it can go cancerous. All right. So first of all, there's a mutation that turns off this gene that is designed to suppress tumors. There's this gene that's designed to look at a cell and go, oh my God, we're going crazy, stop. So it's like a backup, okay, to the stop. You know how I told you there was a stop gene? Well, this is like a backup to the stop gene. The first thing that has to happen is that has to get mutated and broken. In this case, whenever you see mutated, I want you to think broken, because it means the gene doesn't work the same as it did earlier, all right, the same as it's supposed to. So then the cells start to grow. Then there's another mutation that there's a gene that actually can go in and fix these broken the DNA, like this gene up here. There's a gene that can fix this gene, but that has to be mutated. So if that gene gets broke, the gene that's supposed to fix this gene, if that gene gets broke, now we've had 2 mutations, and then there is another mutation of something called a proto-oncogene that creates an oncogene, and the next thing you know, this thing grows out of control. All of these have to do with their checks and balances, and their ways that say stop growing out of control. And our cells have built in quite a few safeguards to keep this from happening. But if those all get damaged, and it's not that hard to do. Sunlight is probably the biggest thing. When the sunlight damages the DNA and the gene is no longer there, or it's damaged, then it doesn't do its job, and the cells start to grow out of control. Okay, there's another a situation where these genes are supposed to work at these checkpoints. There's 3 checkpoints in the cell cycle. I hope you recognize this as the cell cycle. There's 3 checkpoints. There's the G1 checkpoint, where before it starts to copy the DNA, the cell stops and looks around and says, is everybody good to do this? And at that point, some of these genes over here will check for a cancerous situation, and if there is a problem, then it'll flip out into the G0 phase and stay there until it either gets fixed or it dies. Okay, if that doesn't work, if the genes that are supposed to do the checking, these guys up here, if they don't work, then a cancerous cell can slip through this and going into the S process. And then the same thing happens at the G2 phase. It's a different kind of a checkpoint, but it does check for damaged DNA. If there's a gene that does that, if the gene doesn't work, then we slip on through to the metaphase checkpoint. Same kind of thing. These are the 3 checkpoints of these 3 mutations, or these 3 genes are supposed to work. And if these 3 genes get mutated, then this cell can actually slip past it and start going uncontrolled into the cell cycle over and over again. What's scary to me is to think how many cells in our body this happens to, and these things catch. And these things catch, they do their job, the cell goes into the G0 phase, and then it just dies without growing out of control. That probably happens all the time, if you think about it. But if these checkpoints, which are controlled by genes, if those genes are damaged, then these checkpoints don't work, then you got cancer. So it has to do with checkpoints in genes, and if the genes get damaged, which sunlight can damage genes, chemicals can damage genes. Sometimes genes just get mutated just because. If these genes get mutated for some reason and they don't do their job, and it has to happen 3 times, so I mean, it's like, what are the odds cancer actually happens? But it still does, right? And so as a result, the cell goes into an uncontrolled cell cycle. One cell grows and becomes two. They both grow out of control and become four. Then those grow out of control and become eight. Then 16. Then 32. And you end up getting this incredibly large mass that does all that damage. Okay. Most skin cancer is caused when UV radiation and sunlight damages skin cells, although some of it can be caused by chemicals you've come into exposure to. And there are people that don't have a very strong protection to keep this gene from being mutated, so they're more susceptible to these genes becoming mutated, so they're more susceptible to cancer. So there are some people who just get it. And also keep in mind, our skin color has a lot to do with this. If you're a darker person, you're very blessed to have like built-in sunscreen in your skin. There's a built-in chemical that your body secretes called melanin, and that sorry, let me go. And that melanin actually acts like homemade built-in sunscreen, and it keeps the sunlight from hitting the DNA and causing damage. So some people are susceptible for lots of reasons. Maybe they have a genetic problem, they've inherited DNA that it's easier to break, or they're like me and they have very light colored skin, and when the sunlight hits it, there's not as much protection. So if you are a darker person, Hispanic, African American, you have a much lower chance of getting these skin cancers because of the nature of your skin color. And by the way, that's why it's there. That's why it evolved. In fact, actually, light skin evolved from dark skin because light people's ancestors moved into northern Europe where there's not as much sunlight, so they didn't need the sunscreen, so it went away, the melanin, the natural sunscreen. In most cases, lung cancer genes are damaged by chemicals and tobacco products. Almost all lung cancer, you know what, I don't want to say that. A huge amount of lung cancer is caused by people who use tobacco products, smoking. But there are people who are exposed to industrial processes, like people who have been exposed to a product called asbestos. They get something called mesothelioma, which is a type of lung cancer, right? Asbestos, radiation, air pollutants, they can also alter the cells that lead in ways to lung cancer and other things. And I mean, you know, sometimes you just don't know. Who knows why lung cancer or skin cancer or pancreatic cancer or stomach cancer happens? But this process is what causes the cancer. And the research is done in how to keep this from happening. There's all kinds of ways to try to stop the cancer to start with. There's so much research going into cancer right now because in the US it is one of the top leading causes of death. And if we can figure out how to stop people from dying from cancer, then we can extend our lives longer, and you know, we don't lose our family as much. But sadly, we haven't beat it yet. We're getting close. I really do feel that in my lifetime I'll see cancer cured because they'll do something about this process or something. I don't know. All right, as I told you, this was shorter. I'm going to end it now. This ends video number 2. There's one more video where we're going to talk about meiosis and sexual and asexual reproduction, and then we're finished with cell growth and division.